Milcha, let's start with you. What is the situation like there? I'm sure that tensions are significantly ramped up.
Hi, I'm in the city center of Mariupol right now, actually in one of the biggest shopping malls in the area. And what I can tell you is that there's not much activity going on. There's not much shopping being done, as you can imagine. But at the same time, this particular shopping center does have a significant number of ATMs. And what I've seen throughout the day was people queuing up to withdraw money and then going to the exchange offices to exchange it in currencies they think they will be worth more on the long term, mid and long term. I spoke with a few people here in the shopping mall in Mariupol, which is a city about 500,000 people, right just literally on the border with Russia, very close to the border with Russia. And they were telling me throughout the day that they're very worried that this is a significant change in attitude compared to a week ago, when you will ask people on the streets in Ukraine if they were worried, and they will say, they will brush it up. They will say the war will not come to Ukraine. Well, apparently now it's here, and people are preparing for the worst. They're not even hoping for the best and preparing for the worst. They're just preparing for the worst. In terms of changing money, in terms of queuing up to the petrol stations to fill up their gas, I've seen. I went just outside the petrol station close to this shopping mall in Mariupol, and I've seen the prices change within 5 minutes 3 times, just as I was there just grabbing a coffee. Which to me, obviously, it's a sign that things are just rapidly moving and shifting throughout eastern Ukraine. The city is empty. The train that I came into from Kiev was almost deserted, with the exception of a few journalists. And people were just either staying in house, or they were leaving the city last night and throughout the day for much safer places outside eastern Ukraine, or some of them outside the country altogether.
Milcha, don't go anywhere. Samantha, I'm going to go to you now. I suppose we're all waiting to see what Putin does next, but I think a lot of that depends on what the reaction from the West is going to be. We are, of course, waiting to see the package of sanctions that the EU has to offer. Do you think there's going to be anything they can do strong enough to make Putin think again?
Sadly, I don't. And I think that at this point, Putin has moved beyond acting in a rational way. Yesterday, he gave a 2-hour televised address to his Security Council, and I watched it from beginning to end. It was like watching a bad James Bond film with a very bad villain. And Putin was basically sitting on his throne, calling the members of his Security Council to come and say what they thought about the breakaway republics. And they were obviously all absolutely terrified. You had the head of Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service quivering in his shoes as he was reciting by rote something that he clearly didn't even believe, and he made a mistake. He stumbled, and Putin reprimanded him like a teacher reprimands a naughty schoolboy, and they said, okay, go and sit down, come up the next one. This is the behavior of somebody who has stopped behaving like a statesman and who seems to have lost all contact with reality. He then went on state television and addressed the Russian population and said that Ukraine does not really have the right to exist as an independent state. This is the most transparency we have seen from Putin to date, who so far has always hid behind some kind of deniability as to his real designs on Ukraine. And there's another very worrying development, which also makes me think that he's already decided to go full on and to invade the rest of the country, irrespective of what sanctions are pronounced against him. In Munich last week, the Ukrainian president made a very veiled threat to remind the world that Ukraine once had nuclear weapons, and that Ukraine would potentially have the ability to become a nuclear state very, very fast if it decided to. Many people will disagree as to how fast this could happen. But in 1994, Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in exchange for a promise from Russia, the United Kingdom, France, and the United States that they would respect and uphold its territorial integrity. What Zelensky said is, you have not upheld your side of the bargain. Why should Ukraine? Very few Western journalists have picked up on this because it was cushioned in language referring to memorandums that most people don't actually understand. The Russians, of course, picked up on this. Putin picked up on this and repeated it more than once during his address to his people and to the Security Council. And Russian analysts I'm speaking to think that he will use this at a later date as a pretext to take out vital infrastructure in Ukraine that he will accuse of being in the process of building some kind of nuclear capability, military nuclear capability. This is very worrying indeed. And I've tried to remain optimistic throughout the last few weeks, last few months. This morning I woke up very pessimistic indeed as to the future of Ukraine, the whole of the country.
Yeah, I mean, coming back to you, Milch, you heard Samantha there, and she is an expert in sort of, Putin's mind games and Russian power projection, saying that from what she's read and what she's seen, the man seems detached from reality, and she now thinks that a full-scale invasion is no longer off the table, that could happen. Is that being reflected in reaction in Ukrainian media?
Well, absolutely. Ukrainian media, although some of it is obviously biased by the fact that some of the journalists are directly affected by what's going on in their own country, and at the same time, the language they use, some of the media here is towards eastern Ukraine, towards the occupied territories, is they call them terrorists, which obviously is different than what we call it in Western media as separatist pro-Russian forces or Putin-backed militias. There's a strong language in Ukraine. There's obviously a lot of emotion going on amongst journalists here, local journalists. But here in Mariupol, just to pinpoint the location that I'm at and the importance of it, it has to do very much with the fact that this is a city that, if you think that we are in a full-fledged war, and I think the same, this city will definitely be the key point in the next few days, because it's a city that has an open to the sea, and it will connect the so-called Donbas republics, the two autonomous republics, to Crimea and to a sea, to allow them to have imports and exports, basically bringing a lifeline to the occupied territories. So if we're going to see some developments here, in my opinion, I think they will happen in Mariupol or in and around the city in eastern Ukraine, in one of the biggest cities in eastern Ukraine.
Yeah, Milcher, thank you so much for being right there at the centre of the action for us and giving us that feedback. Now, Samantha, we are, of course, waiting to see how the EU reacts, to see if they can put together a package that could deter Vladimir Putin from going further. But what do you think Ukraine's response will be if he does continue to act with military aggression in the east of Ukraine? Do you believe that Ukraine has the capability to put up a valiant response?
Well, if you look at the sheer numbers, how many soldiers Ukraine has and how many soldiers Russia has, then the balance looks very much in Russia's favor. But in Ukraine, you will see a mobilization not only of the military, but of the civilian population. You've had reports last week of the so-called babushka brigades, the grandmothers training to learn to shoot. Ukraine has a lot of women who are in the army and who are prepared to fight. And the Russians will encounter resistance in every single town, in every single village. And these are people who are going to be fighting for their lives. The Ukrainian soldiers who were mobilized now are fighting to defend their country. The Russian soldiers who are going in may be superior in number. A lot of them are terrified young men who do not want to go to war and who will be encountering people who hate them. And this is the Soviet Union was not able to win the war in Afghanistan. The United States were not able to win the war in Vietnam. An invading army very rarely wins in the long term. The Russians may take some territory, but will they hold the territory with the fierce resistance they will meet from the Ukrainians? I don't think so. I know analysts I know think so. Invading armies never succeed for a long time. And history has shown that time and time again.